Dr. Vivian, what an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for participating on this wonderful project that we're doing for our country, Cuba, and the memory of so many men and women, particularly men, who fought for so many years to avoid the tyranny that they're
It is my privilege and my honor to be here with you and sharing these experiences and these anecdotes about my grandfather.
Excellent, excellent. Let's start with asking you a very simple question. When were you born? Where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your family and absolutely about your grandfather.
I was born in Pinar del Rio, Cuba, in January 22nd, 1959, right at the outburst of the Cuban Revolutionary.
So you're a revolutionary? Right in the heart of the revolution.
I'm not part of the revolution, but I am a girl that was born right when the revolution was
just
right there.
Tell me a little bit about your grandfather or your parents. I know your grandfather was under the Constitutional Armed Forces of Cuba.
That is correct. My grandfather's name was Fidel Diaz-Matos.
What was that name again?
Fidel Diaz-Matos. Nothing to do with Fidel Castro, obviously, but he bear that name. Fidel Diaz-Matos. He was born in Unión de Reyes, Matanzas, Cuba, in July 24th, 1909.
And the stories I heard from your beautiful mother, Mima, she's very, very proud of him because she loved Colombia. He was always in the country club of Colombia or in Colombia. Cut that too. Tell us a little bit about your grandfather. So he said he belonged, and he's much older than the stories that we're presenting. For example, of my father, Lieutenant Colonel Sosa-Garcia, Major General Cantillo, Sanchez Mosquera, and others. Tell us
his stories like this.
In his time, and how many presidents did he serve under the Constitutional Armed Forces of Cuba?
His stories like this. He enlisted very young in the armed forces. It was around 1934, 35, something like that. He got married with my grandmother in 1936, and he was sent from Matanzas to Pinar del Rio. They get married. They had a very beautiful marriage. They were very much in love with each other, and he achieved the rank of lieutenant. He was given one of the cities in Pinar del Rio to be sort of like the chief over there, the San Juan y Martinez, many, many years ago. From there, they moved him over to the city again, to Pinar del Rio, and he became the president of the officers club. He was very much in sports. He was the pitcher of a softball team of the officers. He also enjoyed fishing very much. But he was telling me as a child that he was really very proud to be in the armed forces. He served many presidents and dictators as well. But one of the persons that he served, that he felt very proud of, was Batista. He was telling me the story, and I remember him saying, Batista did many right things for the Cuban government. He tried to put justice. He empowered the armed forces of Cuba. He recognized the value that the armed forces had and the purpose of the armed forces. And it was a very, I would say, beautiful years at some point over there. And he conceived that Batista at some point had a bad image with some of the civilians. And I don't know of all the atrocities that they said that occur or not, but I could give testimony to what my grandfather used to say, that he was indeed very proud, and that the Batistan government did many good things for the Cuban people and for the infrastructure as well.
your grandfather, what year did he end his service with the Armed Forces of Cuba? When did he pass on? When did he pass away?
No, he passed away in 1975. So he served the armed forces all the way to the end when obviously Fidel took over. And there was an interesting anecdote. There was a period of time there when the attack to the Cuartel Moncada in Cuba, there was a lot of confusion. They really didn't know much about who was Fidel Castro. And since my grandfather's name was Fidel, there was a little bit of confusion, and some people from Havana knew of a Fidel in Pinar del Rio, and they got him arrested and brought him over to Havana. And it was not until my grandmother really moved very quickly with all the officers, etc., and her political connections in Havana, that obviously they were able to find out it was nothing to do with my grandfather, that there was a big confusion. So he went back to Cuba, to Pinar del Rio, and they gave him a lot of condecoration and a lot of because of a lot of things that came to the surface while he had served in some of the positions there. So he came back with a lot of honor, and my grandmother was telling the story how the Cuban band was playing when they entered Pinar del Rio in recognition that there was a mistake, that he was not Fidel Castro. So that was an interesting thing. Then, unfortunately, he was arrested again when Fidel Castro took over because he had served the armed forces of Batista. So he got arrested on 2 occasions over there on Fairley, and we had to go through that process. I had just burned, and I remember my mother's telling me stories that she had just gave birth to me, and she had to go to prison to see my grandfather there. So it was really a period of a lot of confusion and pretty bad.
Touching upon your grandfather and the critical years of Cuba, critical years during the 50s, there were beautiful years, but then came this 1959 revolution, and it ruined the country. But during that period of where there was a civil war, undoubtedly in Cuba, between brothers and sisters, between brothers at arms, in La Sierra Maestra, do you know, and if you don't know, that's fine, do you know if your grandfather ever fought or had any encounter or had to attend or did anything in La Sierra Maestra where all the war was?
No, I don't really think so. He was obviously in the opposite side of the island. I remember my grandmother saying stories about how the armed forces had to deal with revolutionaries around that time, but I don't remember specifically that he went to Sierra Maestra.
Okay, very good. Now, in 1959, the year of the revolution and the year that you were born, by chance, since he belonged to the Armed Forces of Cuba, the Constitutional Armed Forces of Cuba, do you know if he was ever arrested, became a political prisoner, was thrown in jail, treated badly?
He was
persecuted.
Yeah, he did become a political prisoner, obviously, because he had served the armed forces. I remember my grandmother saying stories about how her house was totally searched for arms, for guns, for proof that he was trying to prevent the Cuban Revolution. So it was a pretty sensitive period of time there, and totally, my family was totally persecuted, and it was pretty bad.
Yeah, I totally understand, and thank you for sharing that story. It's fascinating. I got to know a little bit about your grandfather, and that's fascinating. Let's bring it now to today. When was your family able to leave Cuba? Where did you go? How did you make your life? I know that you're a very accomplished woman. You're a doctor in psychology, and talk to me a little bit about that, about when you left and your life in the United States.
Actually, it was inspired by my grandfather. He was our role model. he was the leader of the family. He had so many beautiful qualities because he was this person with a very strong personality, kind of a handsome guy too, tall, slim, very sports oriented. But at the same time, he transpired this energy that people really respected him. He was a man that was very fair, a person who always followed justice. And he was the one who decided we need to leave the country. Unfortunately, we're being persecuted. The economic situation was pretty bad over there, and for all of us. And he was the one who decided, and we follow him. He was the one who decided we need to fly, we need to leave. And we came to United States in November of 1969. Unfortunately, my father, my mother, and I came before, and just a few months after, around February of the following year, came my grandfather with my grandmother. And we had already moved to Puerto Rico because we had some relative over there, and they went directly over there to Puerto Rico. And it was really interesting because my grandfather immediately began to work, and he was working during that period of time in a what we call nowadays a discoteca, not a club, but a place where they used to sell records back then. And with hard work, my parents were already working as well. With hard work, they raised our family, and it was back in 1974, 75 that I decided I wanted to study initially medicine. I didn't study medicine simply because I was afraid of blood, so I decided to study the neuropsychology and move over to Miami. But my father, unfortunately, was not able to see that because he died in March of 1975. Immediately thereafter, we moved over to Miami. And I became, throughout the years, a doctor in psychology, got married, had children, nowadays grandchildren, and here I am.
Yes, and here you are. Interesting that, I find it interesting that from 1959 to 1969 is when you left, so 10 years of the revolution, your grandfather had to endure in a country that totally changed overnight.
Completely.
Because
let me tell you about those years.
Please.
Let me tell you about those years. It was really interesting because I was a child, and I had a lot of interaction with my grandfather during that period of time, simply because he had to come back to the roots and go back to my grandmother had relatives in the Cuban fields, and he went back to the Cuban fields to raise cows and kind of got the milk and bring it back to the city to sell it, and culture vegetables and bring it back to the city to sell it. So I would spend a lot of time with my grandfather during that period of time. It was my time that I had to get to know the Cuban, I would say, fincas, ranches, and be in contact with nature. And he taught me a lot of things about Cuba during that period of time. He taught me a lot about values. He taught me a lot about family. He taught me a lot about endurance and resilience, and how important it was to follow your values and freedom.
Yeah.
And I had a great memory of him during that period of time.
It's awesome. It's great. From a psychological perspective, since you are a doctor in psychology, I have to ask you this question. How, in your opinion or in your field, how do you see this dramatic experience of all the Cuban people from 1959 to today? Because that's when that's when everything was lost. I view it as something of resilience of these people, that they lose everything, they come here, they build their lives, they reinvent themselves, they'll do whatever it takes to move forward. How do you see it from a psychological perspective, the issue of Cuba the generation that went through all this and what's going on in Cuba today?
I think it made us stronger as a community, as a society. I think that all of our values and what we are as a culture flourish because we have to survive. And we adapted to a new country, and we brought with us all those values, all those beautiful things that we learned from our ancestors, and we tried in a new country. And here we are. We have proved to the world that as a culture we are resilient, that we are strong, that we have a lot to teach other communities as well. And how I see the situation right now, it's really interesting because I see it from a very positive perspective. I see it as the Cuban government, as is right now, has realized that their ideology did not work. And the proof of it, it's really the economic situation and the minor but important changes that and the potential of these changes in the future that they were forced to do, the impact that it would probably have in our political situation is magnificent, simply because when you institute minor reforms, remember that political changes occur as, and history provides, give us that proof. Political changes occur when economic reforms are taking place. And it is not, political reforms are not a step, it's really a process. And the Cuban government was forced, because of the bad economy, to do certain changes. And eventually, when you give power to the individual to make decisions about their economics, which is really what's happening right now, they have given Fidel Castro, or the Castro brothers have given the individual to make decisions by themselves to be able to be successful in their economy. Then they will eventually have more autonomy. And when this body of individuals grow, when there's a mass of individuals that are making decisions by themselves to be able to survive economically, then social changes will have to occur. It's inevitable. And that's really when we will see the dramatic change in our political arena in Cuba. It will take some time to occur, but I will see it as a positive perspective. How do I see our involvement right now in the United States with respect to the Cubans that live here? I see it as a limited but important contribution. Limited because the changes will have to occur inside. And although there's a lot of individuals right now that share the power in Cuba with the Castro brothers, that they don't want to lose their power, they don't want to lose their position, but they do realize that changes need to occur simply because it is the only hope that they have to survive. And there's going to be the Cuban society that will probably be making the most important contributions there, the most important changes. Now, how do I see it from here? I see that through diplomacy, we really need to at least force for three things to occur. One, that there's got to be a stop to the oppression, to the repression of all these people that are trying to have their voice being spoken, to protest. There's got to be a stop to that oppression, to that attack that is totally unbearable. Two, there's got to be a way in which these brothers will have to allow for the political parties to take place because the Cuban Constitution, as it states, allows for it to occur. So they need to allow that, to have the civilians take a role in the Cuban politics. So through diplomacy over here in the United States, we need to have this happen. It's very important that we need to force this, or we need to influence our government in the United States for these changes to occur in Cuba. That's really the way I see it.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much. I want to end it with, if you want to add anything in closing, you're free to do so. But I want to ask you, if you had the opportunity, for example, they won't let me in Cuba, but if you had the opportunity to visit with the Castro brothers there, would you take that opportunity to see the country where you were born? It's not a political question. It's just a question from the heart, because
this is such an interesting question. I'm 53 years old right now. I have relatives over there. I have blood over there. I have my aunt, cousins that they were raised with me. My aunt is critically ill right now. She has come to this country. We have never visited again. My father doesn't want to go to Cuba. From the humanistic point of view, she's asking to see me, and I'm debating whether or not I should go. So far, I have not made that decision. It's very hard to visit the country when you know that a lot of human rights have been violated. If I ever made the decision of going over there, and I hope it would not be when the Castro brothers are there, but if I ever had to make a decision in that respect, it would only be based from the human perspective of providing my aunt with the desire to see me before she dies, and we're debating right now.
Interesting. Thank you for that, and I thank you for your time today. And thank you for sharing your grandfather's story and your story and your
This is my pleasure.
With us.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to come to surface and explain our perspective.